Think about the most powerful person you have ever encountered. Not the loudest, not the most decorated, the most genuinely powerful. Now ask yourself, how often did they explain themselves? How often did they justify their decisions? How often did they defend their choices to people who did not ask for the responsibility of understanding them? Almost never. And that is not a coincidence. It is not arrogance. It is not coldness. It is one of the most precisely calibrated behaviors in the entire psychology of power. And once you understand why it works, once you see the mechanism beneath the silence, you will never look at explanation the same way again. Because the person who explains themselves constantly is not building trust. They are dismantling authority, one justification at a time. What explanation actually signals? Here is what most people do not understand about the psychology of explanation. When you explain yourself, when you justify your decision, defend your position, clarify your reasoning to someone who has not earned the right to that reasoning, you are not communicating strength, you are communicating need. You are communicating that their opinion of your decision matters enough to alter your behavior. You are communicating that their potential disapproval is a threat you feel compelled to neutralize. You are communicating that without their understanding, without their validation, the decision itself feels incomplete. None of this is power. All of this is dependence dressed as transparency. The truly powerful person makes a decision and lets it stand. Not because they do not have reasons. They almost always have more reasons than anyone around them. But because they understand something that the approval-seeking mind cannot grasp. The quality of the decision is not improved by its explanation. And the authority behind the decision is actively diminished by the need to justify it. Think about the people in your life whose judgment you trust most deeply. Now ask yourself, how often do they explain their recommendations to you? And you do it. Not because you are naive, because their track record has made explanation unnecessary. Their authority is self-evident. Explanation would reduce it. The paradox of justification. Here's a psychological dynamic that most people spend their entire lives never seeing clearly. The more you explain yourself, the more you invite scrutiny of the explanation. And scrutiny of the explanation almost always produces doubt. Not because the reasoning is flawed, but because no reasoning is ever complete. Every explanation you offer creates a new surface area for disagreement. The person who doubts your decision may have been silent by your authority, but the moment you provide an explanation, you have given them something to engage with, something to counter, something to critique. You have converted a closed matter into an open debate, and you converted it yourself. This is the paradox of justification. You explained in order to gain understanding, but the explanation itself creates the conditions for misunderstanding. You tried to reduce doubt. The explanation produced more of it. The most powerful negotiators in the world understand this intuitively. When asked why they will not accept a term, they say, "This does not work for us." Full stop. No elaboration, no apology, no explanation. Because they know that every word added to that sentence is a word that can be picked apart, challenged, turned back against them. The silence after the refusal is not emptiness, it is pressure, and it works. Silence as the language of certainty. There is a reason that throughout history, across cultures, across traditions, across centuries of human organization, the figure of genuine authority has been consistently associated with restraint of speech rather than abundance of it. The elder who listens more than speaks. The general who gives orders without holding seminars. The negotiator whose stillness in a room contains more force than anyone else's words. This is not cultural accident. It is the recognition of a fundamental psychological truth. Gravity does not justify itself to falling objects. The sun does not argue for its right to rise. When you speak from genuine certainty, you do not need the other person to agree with your reasoning. You do not need them to validate your logic. You need only one thing, that they understand what you have decided. Not why, what. The why is yours. The what is theirs to receive. The person who explains is asking, do you accept my reasoning? The person who doesn't explain is saying, this is what is happening. The first is a request for permission. The second is the exercise of authority. These are not subtle differences. They produce completely different responses in the people receiving them. What silence does to the listener. Here is what happens neurologically when a genuinely powerful person does not explain themselves. The listener's brain, encountering a decision without justification, does not conclude that the decision is arbitrary. It concludes that the reasons exist and are simply not being shared. It concludes that the authority behind the decision is sufficient not to require explanation, and it responds to that authority accordingly. This is why the most influential people in any field, the ones whose opinions move markets, change organizations, shift cultures, rarely explain why they think what they think. They simply say what they think, and the weight of their history, the accumulated evidence of their judgment, does the rest. Explanation shifts the burden of proof onto the decision-maker. Silence shifts it back onto the doubter. The person who demands an explanation must now justify their demand, and in most cases, when faced with genuine authority, they find they cannot. When powerful people do explain themselves, and why, this is not a rule without nuance. The most powerful people do explain themselves, but they choose when and they choose to whom with extraordinary precision. They explain to people whose understanding is necessary for execution. They explain to people who have earned the right to their reasoning through demonstrated loyalty, competence, and alignment of interest. They explain when the explanation itself is a tool, not a defense, but an investment, a way of building the capacity of someone they have decided is worth building. What they never do is explain reactively. They never explain because someone expressed disapproval. They never explain because someone challenged their authority. They never explain to neutralize the discomfort of having made a decision that someone else does not like. These explanations are surrenders. They are capitulations to social pressure dressed as rational discourse. And every time a powerful person makes one of these surrenders, they lose something they cannot easily get back. The most dangerous words a leader can say are, "Let me explain why I made that decision," when what prompted those words was someone's expression of dissatisfaction. Because in that moment, they have just told the room that dissatisfaction is sufficient to earn an explanation, and the room will use that information. The deeper reason, explanations are about the explainer, not the explained. Here is the truth that most people in positions of authority never want to acknowledge. When they explain themselves reactively, when they justify and defend and clarify, they are not doing it for the other person's benefit. They are doing it for their own. They are trying to relieve the discomfort of being disapproved of. They are trying to repair a relationship with the other person's opinion of them. This is the mechanism at the heart of performative explanation. It is not communication. It is self-regulation. It is the management of internal anxiety about external judgment. And the most powerful people have resolved this need in a different direction. Not by not caring what people think. The most powerful people care deeply about accurate judgment of their decisions. But by locating the evaluation of their decisions in the right place, in results, in time, in the informed opinion of the people they respect, not in the immediate reaction of every person their decision affects. They are comfortable being misunderstood in the short term, because they are confident in being understood in the long term. And that comfort, that willingness to hold a decision in silence while the evidence assembles itself around it, is one of the rarest and most valuable forms of strength a human being can possess. How to practice this? The next time you feel the impulse to explain yourself, pause. Ask what is driving the impulse. Is it genuine communication of something necessary, or is it the management of someone's disapproval? Is it an investment in another person's understanding, or is it a bid for their validation? If it is the second, Do not explain. Let the decision stand. Let the silence hold. Watch what happens when you stop providing the explanation that was never really required. You will find that most of the time, the decision was not in danger. Your authority was not at risk. What was at risk was your comfort with other people's discomfort. And that discomfort, theirs and yours, is exactly the material that genuine authority is built from. The most powerful people in any room are almost always the quietest. Not because they have nothing to say, because they have learned something that took most of them years to understand. The decision speaks. Let it. If you reach this moment, write in the comments the word silent, and tell us, is there a decision you have been over-explaining that you are now going to let stand? We want to know. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because the next video reveals the specific behaviors that signal genuine authority in any room, and how to develop them without saying a single extra word. Until then, decide.